This is Timothy Wood with Citadel Civil Engineering, and in this paper, we're going to be discussing closing the homework feedback loop using a dual submission with reflection homework methodology. Again, I'm Timothy Wood. My co-authors are Ryan Kent Giles and Dan Nail. We're all professors at the Citadel in the Civil Engineering Department. So in this paper, we're talking about homework. And as we were thinking about homework, we came up with an idea of what the challenges are with beneficial homework as well as the goals of beneficial homework. So the challenges include time management, both for the student and for the faculty members, the wide availability of solutions. So Chegg is just a nightmare in terms of shortcutting student learning through copying solutions. And in many ways, it feels like a losing battle for us to try and stay ahead of that as instructors. Also, students seem to be invested often in shallow learning. It appears often that we encounter students who, maybe not the majority of students, but many who look at their education as an opportunity to acquire a certification. And they're actively engaged in not learning. And we know that won't serve them well, and so we're calling them into deeper learning and looking to create homework methodologies that support that deeper learning. Finally, we also see as a major challenge that of instructor fatigue. And so the instructors, as they think through grading, how do they grade well and not become exhausted by the sheer mass of poorly done homework that we often have to grade? The goals of good homework involve giving the students opportunity for lots of practice, as well as providing them feedback on how they're doing. Good homework, beneficial homework would also provide the opportunity for self-assessment and for the instructor to see how they're doing. When we looked at our literature review, this really broke down into four different categories of homework. There was online homework, which provides lots of practice and feedback. It reduces cheating because the numbers can be automatically generated, and it reduces the grade load. The problem is it becomes a little bit black box from the professor's perspective. They're not able to see what the students are doing, and it's not pushing the students toward thinking deeply about it. They're just trying to grind out the homework through the online platform. Another mode looked at recitation. Sometimes this took the form of separate class periods or quizzes at the beginning of classes or calling on students to come work problems on the board. And so this provided the same kind of amount of practice and feedback. The students were expected to do the homework beforehand and then reduce cheating because they were asked to then redo one problem out of a set as a quiz or on the board. This allowed the instructor to see how their learning was going while reducing the sheer volume that they needed to grade. The ones that were most of interest to us was the metacognition and self-assessment. So the metacognition practice is the idea is that the students would work the problems and then they would think about how they were learning. So sometimes this involved a cover sheet or a questionnaire they would fill out. The grading load varied a lot. Some professors would have an infinite submission sequence where they would keep submitting homework and getting feedback until they got the problems right. Others really didn't care how they did on the homework. They were looking more at their reflection of how they did on the homework. This provides a lot of instructor observation, but it's not always as good at providing the feedback to the student. The self-assessment model said, well, let's instead of the instructor spending time grading their work, let's let the student grade the work. And so again, they get that practice, and then the feedback comes in the form of their solutions. So they get solutions from the faculty member who then and then they're able to grade their own work, which puts the grading load really on the student rather than on the faculty members. Typically, the faculty are grading these for completion. What we aim to do in our dual submission with reflection model was to uh, combine the best of both the metacognition forms and the self-assessment forms. So in our model, the students start out by attempting the problem. So they do an initial attempt where they solve the problems, they follow a format, and we're emphasizing that the goal is for them to understand the problems and the solutions. Then when they turn that in, they provide an initial attempt cover sheet. This cover sheet asks them some simple questions about whether or not they followed the format, generated a figure, and whether or not they found an answer. This is not a question of whether or not the answer is right, but whether or not they found one. If their solution was complete, we then ask these reflection questions. Many of them are CATs or classroom assessment techniques that allow the students to synthesize what they've learned and what they're doing and provide that feedback to the professor, really closing the feedback loop in terms of how they're doing on the homework. Kind of the second half of their homework is then to do the self assessment. So, this is where they would then correct their work based on the professor's solution and adjust their understanding, hopefully, and then fill out this self-assessment cover sheet. They would be asked whether or not the figures and the answer were correct, and then thinking through their own self-assessment on their problem-solving ability and what topics remain for them to master. So again, closing that feedback loop even as we guide their self-assessment exercise. So when we look at the whole big picture, really the students are asked to engage with their homework 4 different times. The first half, typically for a week's worth of homework, it might be due online, say Sunday night. And they would have their initial attempts that they would work the problems, and then their cover sheet. They would scan that all in and upload it to the LMS. And then, as soon as that homework due date passed, they would get the corrections through the LMS, the solutions, and they would correct their work and fill out that cover assessment worksheet and turn in class, say Wednesday of the following week. This allowed them to earn credit in a way that was really within their control. So the idea is that just doing the homework problems was worth 60% of the credit. So if they do that initial attempt, they work the problems to the end, they do the cover sheet, and they turn it in on time, they're going to get 60% credit for the homework by problem. Now, if they then do the correction, the assessment, and they turn that in on time, that 60% goes up to 90%. The final question is whether or not that initial attempt was correct. Now, they won't know this until they've done their assessment, and that's why it's on the self-assessment cover sheet of whether or not they actually got the correct answer. But a remaining 10% of the grade is associated with doing it right the first time. The hope is that for students would see that they don't need to cheat to get high marks on their homework. Instead, they can get a 90% just by turning in their work on time. Again, if they are able to get the right answer, if they do work through and push through and get the help they need, then they can get that 100%. Finally, if the students miss that initial attempt, we're still going to give some partial credit for turning in their assessment at 50%. So we really believe that this dual submission with reflection addresses these challenges and goals. It provides them more control over their time management. It minimizes the temptation toward relying on online or other solutions. And it really pushes that deeper learning through those self-assessment techniques. It also reduces instructor fatigue because we're able to then grade basically by evaluating cover sheets. Maybe we flip through the work, but we're really looking, did they turn in the problems and did they get them right? And that's going to determine the grade. So this provides a lot of practice and that immediate feedback through the solution. The self-assessment allows them an opportunity to think about their own learning, and then it allows them to communicate that learning to the instructor so that they can adjust what they're doing in the class to meet the students' needs. When we gave some questions about whether or not this helped them, we asked whether or not they felt engaged in their learning during the initial attempt, the self-assessment, or as compared to instructor-graded learning. And in general, 90% of the classes felt that this was a better way to do things. They felt more engaged in their learning. There was a slightly higher preference, more engagement for the self-assessment than the initial attempt, which certainly seems to be far better than that instructor-graded learning for many of the students. When asked about the cover sheets, it was less clear that they were helped by the cover sheets. And so instead, about 50% of the students found that the cover sheets were helpful to them. When we looked at the part of the homework process that helped them the most, far and away self-assessment portion was what helped them the most. And we're glad to see that the students were engaging in learning as they evaluated their own homework. We also wanted to ask how the students felt about their grades. And again, more than 90% of the students felt that the grades were fair. So much of the control over what grade they earn is placed on the students that an overwhelming majority felt that it was fair, really improving that instructor rapport. And furthermore, they did prefer it better than instructor graded homework. And then finally, the proof is in the pudding. Uh, do they want to see it more? And again, almost 90% of the students want to see this homework process in more of their classes. And at the Citadel, we've seen a great deal of success as faculty have incorporated this homework methodology into their classes. We've seen faculty be able to spend more time on presenting quality content in the classroom and less time slogging through homework that's underappreciated. The students have also felt like they have more control over their grades and are beginning to see why we would do this, and they're getting more control over their learning. So that's our paper. This is our conclusion. Please read the paper, and we look forward to answering your questions during the online Q&A. Thank you.